And now joining us in the studio with the analysis on what to expect from the South with Gaza is Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Dr. Sherman, thank you so much for coming back in today.
Good to be back with you.
All right, so first of all, what can be done? Maybe a preemptive strike. I know that your go-to is incentivized immigration, but ahead of violence or in the midst of violence with the Hamas terror organizations in the Strip, incentivized immigration isn't always the most expedient response.
Well, the question is what your time horizon is, and if you're not for incentivized immigration on a large scale, what's your vision for Gaza in 10 or 15 years? If you cannot imagine the Palestinians morphing into something that they haven't been for the last 100 years, and show little sign of morphing into in the foreseeable future, why would you expect things to be different if you carry on trying to foist self-determination on which has failed time and time again? In fact, I think it's quite reasonable to say that as far as self-determination goes, the Palestinians have failed the test of history, and we should be looking now for alternative solutions. And incentivized immigration seems to be what many Gazans want. There's a great clamor to leave.
So why do you think that is not something that is being pushed among the Israeli legislature?
Well, for two things. Firstly, it's perceived as being politically incorrect. And secondly, I think it's being...
Isn't Israel's actions politically incorrect in the eyes of the world most of the time?
That's true, but it's a smaller intellectual jump. But the second thing I was going to say is that I think it's being presented incorrectly. Because, everyone's talking about incentivized evacuation of Jewish settlers in occupied territories, or what are called occupied territories. And that was what happened in Gaza as well. But if there's no moral blemish in giving Jewish settlers or Jewish residents financial incentives to evacuate their home, to allow the establishment of what will inevitably be yet another homophobic, misogynistic Muslim-majority tyranny, as you have in Gaza, why should offering financial incentives to Arabs to evacuate their homes to prevent the establishment of such a undesirable entity? So I think the whole issue of incentivized immigration has been poorly presented.
So why isn't Egypt going for it though? Because like you said, you've been a proponent of incentivized immigration for years, and somebody in the Knesset must have heard you by now, or thinks like you, or has connections to this sort of ideology. So why hasn't that been pushed even in the background? And you get Jordan or Egypt or Qatar.
You could ask the same question: why has a failed policy of a two-state solution been pushed for a quarter of a century? There are many things that I find very difficult to understand.
Well, really, a two-state solution goes all the way back to the 47 partition plan. That was the original idea.
But it really became the centerpiece of Israeli foreign policy vis-à-vis the Palestinian issue a quarter of a century ago with the Oslo Accords. And since then, none of the pledges, optimistic pledges made by the proponents have come true. And all the ominous predictions made by the opponents have indeed come true. So you might ask exactly the same question: why are people still pushing a two-state solution when it's obviously failed? And if you want the ultimate indictment of the two-state solution, and that's Gaza. And in fact, I think the only solution, and many Gazans apparently think this as well, because there's a great clamor to exit Gaza. In fact, the only thing that's preventing a massive exodus from Gaza is money. And I think that's what Israel and the world should be providing it.
So if such a plan were allowed, how long do you think it would take, if it were put into effect, how long do you think it would take to really work?
Well, it depends, how it's implemented and how many funds are committed to it. I think it could be done in reasonably short time. But
what's enough money to give to the Palestinians that other countries would absorb them?
Well, I would say you probably have to give a family of four around about $250,000. But the question is not money. I mean, the United States spent $1 trillion on 2 failed wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So if they could spend, you'd much less than the United States spent on their 2 failed wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Money's not the problem. The problem is political perception and political legitimacy. And I think this should be put on the table fairly and squarely. You know, you asked how long would it take. It's funny, people keep asking questions about incentivized immigration, but they never ask about other solutions. No one asked, you know, how long will a 2-state solution take? No one thought it would take a quarter of a century to produce nothing. And you know, no one asked, well, what happens if a 2-state solution fails? Those have never been obstacles in trying to implement it. So why should a far more reasonable approach like incentivized immigration have to answer those questions before it's adopted?
All right, well, fair enough. Dr. Sherman, as always, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.